Please sit down, Peter Pomerantsev. And welcome to the book fair in Gothenburg. And welcome all of you here. We're going to discuss this book by the writer Peter Pomerantsev. Nothing is true and everything is possible in Swedish.
Yeah.
My name is Kristina Henschen. I'm from the trade union solidarity organization, Union to Union. And Peter, I'm very happy to have you here. In the background here, we have pictures actually from Russia by the photographer Maria Söderberg to give the right inspiration to us here on stage and for the audience, of course. But you know, Peter, when I read this fascinating book, I feel that we may have met before, but we haven't. But it's like the same time almost as when I was there, and it's so crazy.
Well, maybe we have met. I don't know. There were a lot of parties in Moscow, so I can't remember everyone. But yeah. Well, I mean, that was why I wrote the book. I was living in Moscow. I came back to London, and I wasn't even writing the book. I just started writing down stories because I made documentaries, and I had more stories than I could film. And I started writing down the stories that I couldn't film because I didn't want to lose them, because I realized that just the human landscape around me, I could sense it was unique, because that world is already gone. There's something else going on in Russia now, which is somebody else will write about that. But that first 15 years of the 21st century, I could feel it was unique. I think we all could. That's why we were there.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal, actually.
Well, I just started filming it. I mean, before I was making documentaries, I was at film school there, and I just started filming the lives of people around me. I don't know, just instinctively, something in me said, film this, because it won't happen again.
What did it give you? I mean, what kind of sense did you get from this unreal, unexpected environment that we both went through? With those fascinating persons. You're mentioning one of them in your book, a person called Monroe, who actually turned up in different kinds of costumes, kind of an important person in the Petersburg circus where I was.
Yeah.
What did it give you? What was fascinating for you when you came there? I mean, you yourself, I have to add that you yourself has a Russian heritage through, and went with your parents first to Germany, then to the UK. So you speak Russian and went back.
Yeah, I went back. I mean, my parents left Russia in 1978 when I was 9 months old. So it didn't feel like going back. I mean, I had the advantage of speaking Russian, which allowed me to penetrate into society deeper than a foreigner. But I was certainly, my brains were utterly un-Russian. It took me 9 years to start thinking like a Russian.
What do you mean thinking like a Russian? What is that?
Okay, so you know that somebody doesn't understand Russia when they ask the question, but what do Russians really believe? Because when you live there, you realize the point of this society is that, not that you don't believe nothing, you believe different things at the same time. It's a pantheistic society, and it comes from the late Soviet condition where everybody was officially communist, but nobody believed in it, and everybody had a schizophrenic existence, including the elites, from the top to the bottom. And so asking people like that, what do you believe in? They just sort of stare at you in a weird way. They're like, well, at what time of the day? People are like, what does Putin really believe in? What does Lavrov believe in? If you ask that question, you don't understand Russia. After 9 years, you stop asking that question.
And how did you realize that after 9 years?
I mean, in the book, the book is also a bildungsroman, so I have my own experience in Russia, and I realize you have to be sort of initiated into this mentality. It's a political mentality, largely. This incredible cynicism and schizophrenia. And in the book, I kind of realized that if I go further in this society, I will start playing along those rules. And so I decide to leave, because I can't, for various reasons. So I guess that is when it became part of my life. I had to experience it and understand that if I want to stay in Russia and progress and be a success, I will also have to get up in the morning and say, Putin, I love you. In the evening, go, oh, I hate Putin. And play this game.
Kitchen, right?
Well, no, it's not even in the kitchen. It's in the car, whatever. but I would have to stop playing this game as well. Because I was working in TV, and at the end of the day, if you want to be big in TV, big as it's successful, you have to stop playing the game. There's no way around it.
But being from a dissident family, what was the picture of Russia that you actually grew up with?
Listen, I was a dissident family, but my mother's a documentary maker. So she started going back to Russia after 1991 to make documentaries, and she would take me with her. So, and my father's a Russian writer. I mean, he's a dissident second. He's a writer who writes in Russian. So I just grew up with Russia, and you know, my first jobs were traveling with my mother, working on documentaries. So I didn't have this Russia of the mind. I was just involved in it from a very young age. Other dissidents, other emigre children have a very different idea. Yeah, either idealized or the opposite, hell on earth. But I was just involved with it, so I had no abstraction.
But nevertheless, you decided to go to Russia, and you described it as being part of this kind of, there's a showcase of being a Western fake model or environment. They use you, they choose to call you by your English name Peter and not Piotr, and you get a lot of opportunities through this from your background. You even describe yourself as being a far worse producer than you actually get compared to the opportunity that you're actually provided with. So it was a kind of seemed to be kind of a good opportunity for you to explore.
I mean, I was part of a wave of people who went to China, India, Russia, the brick economies that were booming in the 2000s. And it wasn't just me, there were, there's the people you'd expect, the financiers or the lawyers, but there were architects, designers, all of them coming to kind of create the visuals of the new Russia. And I was working in TV, in entertainment TV. I wasn't doing news. I was destroying Russian culture through Western reality shows and sitcoms and stand-up comedy. And they had this incredible hunger for Western formats because Russian TV had fallen behind. And they were getting through all these different formats and all these different kind of shows, and a lot of Western producers went over. And it was just a land of opportunity. No, it was an adventure. That's why people were going. In London I would be at the bottom, and suddenly in Russia I was the director. I mean, that was amazing when I was 24.
Did it ever feel that it was kind of immoral, taking those opportunities?
No, that wasn't the immoral bit. But I was there because it was immoral, yes. I mean, that was part of the seduction. It was, it's Weimar Berlin, yeah. It was all very immoral. That was great.
But I mean, rather contributing to a very weird, strange picture of and culture.
Yeah, I mean, less so there. I know it's very tempting to blame reality shows for everything that's bad in the world. But actually, the entertainment channel that I work with, I think they were doing very good work because they were... you had a lot more freedom in entertainment than you had in news and politics. So all the people who worked there were naturally oppositionist. Most of them, the ones who ran it, had a background in sort of modern arts and theatre. They'd all been students of Vasilyev, who's this famous theatre director. Then they'd become advertising people, and now they all moved into TV. And they were essentially trying to change the psyche of the Russian youth through entertainment. They were also making a lot of money. I wasn't, but the Russians were. But so, for example, they made reality shows with gay people in them, because a lot of them were gay, and it was a way for them to normalize homosexuality in Russia. They made the most successful sitcom in Russia, which featured like a strong woman and a weak guy, which was a way for them to push feminism in Russia. So the way they saw it, they were actually doing these very interesting psychological experiments. Not experiments, but trying to make tolerance more normalized through pop culture. I was much more concerned when I started working with the liberal press, because I worked for something called Snob magazine for a while, which was the Russian version of the New Yorker, which wasn't just a magazine. It was a magazine. It was they wanted to do a TV channel, which is why they brought me. It was a huge social networking site. It was sponsored by Russia's richest man at the time, Prokhorov. It was run by sort of the deputy editor was Masha Gessen, who's a famous anti-Putin critic. It was full of kind of liberal oppositionists. And we were encouraged to be as oppositional as possible. So it felt very free. We were like, bad Putin, bad Russia, corruption. But at one point, we would be like, but hold on, there's no way this project is happening without the Kremlin approving it. And it kind of dawned on me that this is exactly how the Kremlin wanted its opposition to be. Because we would write about, how bad Putin was, and then we'd write about holidays in Tuscany. And we were trying to develop what we called a global Russian, a new type of globalized Russian. So Putin could go, look at my enemies, they're liberals, they care about holidays in Tuscany and vegetarianism and sea bass. It's called Snob Magazine, they're against the people, I'm the champion of the people, here is my opposition. And sure enough, Prokhorov became the pseudo-liberal candidate at the presidential elections, soaked up 10% of the vote, soaked up the discontent of the liberal elites, and then disappeared from political life. So yeah, it was essentially an operation. So that was much more concerning. The idea that I thought I was, doing a nice liberal project, an oppositional project, but actually we were completely playing the Kremlin's game.
That's so interesting. Did you feel used?
Much more at that point than when, the evil entertaining shows, Yeah, I mean, I wasn't at the center of it, but that's the hard thing in Russia. You never leave the matrix. Every layer has another layer to it, another layer. You leave the matrix when you get shot, like Anna Politkovskaya, the great Novaya Gazeta journalist. She got to the truth, and then the payment is very quick. So, or you get put under house arrest, or you get put in jail. But as long as you have a nice life, you're somehow part of this game.
But when did you actually decide to compile all those stories, those fascinating stories, and many important and untold stories? When did you actually decide that this would be an important book to write?
I never wrote anything. So I wrote my first article when I was 34. So I was never a writer. I was a documentary maker and a TV producer. And I went to a party when I got back to London, and I got drunk, and one of the people there happened to be an editor at the London Review of Books. And I ended up writing a story about my time as a TV producer, and it was just really successful. Then I wrote another one about Surkov, who was the propagandist in chief in Russia, and now does foreign policy for Putin. Fascinating guy. He also writes postmodernist novels, used to be a theatre director, still writes these very artsy postmodernist stories about war and about corruption while being a warmonger and a corruptioneer. But so I wrote a story about him, and then I just suddenly realized that my experiences there, that world had been untold. Because I'd made sense of it for myself, but people didn't understand it. And so kind of a book was born, and I turned out that I didn't know that I liked writing, so I only started writing 4 years ago. And now I prefer it to making films.
Was it difficult? I mean, you mentioned in your book that a very important story about Bill Browder and the death of Sergei Magnitsky, and the fact that Bill Browder is very hesitant to tell what was actually going on in Russia, because nobody would ever believe, because it was so crazy. Was this your fear when you wrote this book, that it would be seen as a conspiracy or seen as a book that was, too crazy, or was that never part of
funny, yeah. I guess I was lucky that Putin invaded Ukraine, and everybody could see kind of what we'd seen inside the country became global. So the book came out just as it ends with the invasion of Ukraine. So you're right. It made sense to people. You're right, because people could see the extent to which Putin was lying about Ukraine, and they're like, oh, I get it now. And so imagine that's been going on domestically. But then since then, the book ends with this vision of the whole world becoming more like Russia, with truth disappearing. And a lot of people were skeptical when the book came out. Oh, it's a Russian problem. It's an Eastern European problem. But now we have Trump. Everyone's like, okay, I get it. That's what you're talking about. Because the book ends with a paradox. It ends with this idea that I go to Russia, I see this system based on pure performance and sadism, but really performance. And at the end of the book, I have the sense that this is starting to happen everywhere, and I come back thinking I'm coming back to a normal West, and I see it happening in the West as well. And Donald Trump's just made my next book, basically. It's great. People now understand what I'm talking about, that this is a real problem, when people stop caring about the facts, or stop caring about the idea of the truth.
This is actually something you've been bringing up afterwards, the similarities between the way of working of Putin, Trump, the Brexit campaign, even the ISIS.
It's Putin.
Yeah, an important call here.
Mr. Putin? Sorry. I'll switch it off. I'm really sorry.
Tell Putin that you're busy.
Yeah.
No, but the longing for rebuilding the homeland on emotional grounds, and also to use this paranoid discourse in the building.
Listen, I mean, there's something very fundamental going on. I think I look at it this way. In order to need facts aren't very pleasant. Yeah? Facts remind you that you're going to die. Facts remind you that your country's in decline. Facts remind you that you're not very good looking. Facts are not nice. We only need facts as a society. We only need the truth if we're trying to do something with it. So as long as we had an idea of the future, we needed facts. So weirdly enough, the Soviets lied all the time, but they still needed to pretend it was the truth because they had officially an idea of the future. In Europe, for a long time, we were post-Cold War. We were sort of, in Eastern Europe, they were trying to get into the EU, and that was the future that they were building, and they needed truth and facts and rationality to do it. Since we've lost an idea of the future everywhere, Europe doesn't have an idea of its future, Russia doesn't even pretend to, now America suddenly doesn't after Iraq and the financial crash. You don't need facts anymore. So you get these leaders who basically say, facts, they're for dummies, who needs facts? And instead you have these warped nostalgias, these fantasies. And you see that everywhere. I mean, it's at its most perverse in ISIS, or with the narcos in Mexico, who do something very similar. But you see it in Hungary with Orban, you see it with Kaczynski in Poland, you see it in Putin, you see it with Erdogan, you see it in a different way in Western Europe, and now you see it in America. So I think the problem is that we have a complete lack of vision at the moment. And that started to have huge consequences.
Well, like what kind of consequences are you fearing the most?
Well, if you're not going anywhere, then you don't need to be making sense anymore. You can just have pure emotions. You can feel great,
But how do you actually meet that with a strategy? If somebody is building their arguments on emotions, how do you... It's like a sect or a cult where believers are very hard to actually convince about anything else. Is it possible?
I don't have an answer to that. I think we're in a very dangerous place. I mean, we see one society after the next slipping into unreason. We're never very reasonable to start off with, but it sort of happened in Russia, sort of happened in Hungary, sort of happened in Poland. It's been happening in the Middle East a lot, and now it's happening in America. Sweden is our last hope.
We'll see if we live up to that. We hope so. But
everybody talks about Sweden and Denmark are the last rational places, in the West now.
But after all, you have some recommendations that you have a thinking around how to meet this kind of emotional strategy, and to meet it with a counter strategy, and to meet the disinformation that is going on.
Well, yes. I don't know if it'll work though. Listen.
Explain what is your thinking around this?
Well, I mean, very simply, it's about what we're talking about in all these societies is a loss of a public space where people can construct a vision of the future. So I think in Sweden you probably still have it, but it's definitely been lost in the US and clearly been lost in Russia. So the question is, how do we create that public space again? How do we create trust so that we can we can start having a dialogue about the society we want to live in? So there's that, and there's lots of ways to do that through information technology, through different types of public broadcasting. So there's different ways of doing that. But I think without a strategic vision of the future, then all of this will actually be irrelevant. I mean, there are many technical things we can do. You can use the internet to talk to people, one-on-one who you couldn't talk to before. But without an idea of the future and what we're trying to be as a society, all of this just crumbles away. Nostalgia is much more seductive,
But where is Russia going next? What is your...
Gotland.
Yeah, that's what we also think here, eventually. But I mean, we all want to understand who is this Putin. Masha Gessen even wrote a whole book about it. She was here a year ago at the book fair trying to explain who is he. Who is he for you? I mean, you actually once said that he is more of a gangster perceived, but he's actually an ordinary academic KGB guy, quite a grey one. So he wants to give a picture of being someone else.
You asked me what Putin believes. I think you're, again, asking the wrong question about Russia. Look, the dynamics in Russia, I think we need to demystify this stuff a little bit. The dynamics in Russia are exactly the same as most former empires who can't find a role for themselves. Britain faces the same questions. Like most countries, it's split between a group that wants to globalize and wants to be international, and a group that wants to, protect, what they perceive as their national culture. The dynamics are pretty much the same as everywhere else. I think we mystify far too much because Russia needs to mystify itself. That's how it makes sense of itself. I'm a boring Anglo-Saxon. I like to sort of break things down, and the politics that you see there are a very extreme version of stuff that you see sometimes here, but you see the same system in China, you see the same system Erdogan is building, you see Chavez built the same system. This is a global trend based on corruption and media manipulation. So there's nothing it's not that special. What it is special at is making stories about itself and creating this literary flair. So Russia is the only place where the propagandist writes novels about himself as a propagandist, in the third person. That's what makes Russia special. It takes these things that we see everywhere and then it turns them into literature.
So the importance to demystify the...
When we get to politics, yes. Look, there's an old thing, there's been so many books written about this, but this idea that Russia is the unconscious of the West, Freud's theories of the unconscious were based on Russian patients. And this old idea of Russia as the unconscious of the West, and Russia sees itself as the unconscious of the West. And obviously the unconscious, you place all your fears there, and all your phobias and your paranoias. And Russia wants to play that role as well. But here we're talking about cultural and literary theory rather than geopolitics.
Well, thank you, Peter Pomerantsev, and thank you for bringing this book to us. For me, myself, throwing me back 15, 20 years in time and reviving old memories and the craziness that was going on and to some extent has been turning out in a way that nobody really expected, I would say. Did you expect this ending?
As I was writing it, I realized that the logical progression, I didn't realize when I was living there, but as I was writing the work, I realized that the logical progression would be that this society loses touch with reality. Because all these games they play, this constant performance, it could only end up in a place where you start to go a little bit mad, which is essentially what's happened.
What's your next project?
I'm going to be looking at, well, if my publisher takes it, it's about this phenomenon across the world. So I'll be looking at propaganda across the world. So ISIS, America, Mexico. I don't know, Sweden isn't in it at the moment, but I should.
Project, huh?
Well, look, there's something else going on. There's something underneath all of this, which is very interesting. But plus, there are great stories.
We look forward to that very much.
Yep.
A big hand to Peter.